Hi, I'm Jill Renihan, Education Segment Development Manager for Axis Communication. With me today is Scott Lord, Life Safety Consultant with ECC, and we're going to talk today about PASS K12. And Scott, I'm going to give you a chance to tell us a little bit about yourself and your background.
All right. Well, Jill, thank you. I'm Scott Lord with Electronic Contracting Company. Been in the industry since 1999 and with PASS since we started. So I've been doing life safety solutions since 99. And when we had the opportunity to have a group come together, I was able to be blessed to be part of that. And so we're here today to talk a little bit about the history of that group and what we're doing and some things that'll be happening in our new Revision 7.
So tell us then a bit about what actually is PASS K12, what does it stand for, and then what was important about the beginnings of the work that you guys did.
Yeah, so the Partner Alliance for Safer Schools, or PASS, came about actually through a coordinated effort with the Security Industry Association and the National Association of System Contractors, so SIA and NSCA. And this really developed here at ISC West, where there was a roundtable discussion on K through 12 and higher ed and how could we do a better job of securing those buildings and being able to provide a physical security framework. Back then, we didn't really have emergency operations plans. We didn't have security departments, especially for schools. From that, Jim Crumbly actually got a group together in July of that year in Atlanta, where Access being one of the people that started with us, we came down there and said, let's do something for K through 12 schools. And that's where PASS was literally born. So
in terms of PASS and its application to schools, is it really just a way for manufacturers and consultants or product specialists? Is it a way for them to sort of advertise their devices?
Yeah, that's one thing PASS does not do, is PASS doesn't endorse or approve any kind of manufacturer, integrator, or that sort of thing for products. One of the things that we started in our first charter was to be vendor agnostic. So really what the Partner Alliance for Safer Schools put together is a guideline that's specifically written to the school districts, to the administrators, to the security personnel, to really help them better understand a holistic approach to security. So what manufacturers and integrators and others do with that is to help show how that strategic approach can be implemented in schools.
So I don't know if I've ever told you this story, but when I was appointed to be the Director of Security and Safety for my school district, a K-12 district, I worked there for 34 years, and was the Director of Security there for 6 years. But upon finding myself in that position, I did a Google search and put in best practices. I didn't want to just do practices, right? I wanted best practices in school security, especially for K-12, because it's a unique environment, right? It's not the same as, I don't know, corporate or banking or industry. And so I searched for best practices, and what came up at the top of my Google search was the PASS K-12 guidelines. I was astounded, first of all, to find something that really helped me begin to assess my schools and know where I should prioritize. Because quite honestly, I had a lot of work cut out for me, right? And where do you start when you've got 10 different things that need to be done, need to be accomplished in terms of amping up a security profile for a district? So I used the PASS guidelines. More astounding was that they were free, right? I didn't have to pay anything to access this really strong wealth of information and knowledge, capturing, lots of experts, knowledge of what schools really needed. also then allowing me to assess my schools, prioritize my needs, served as some backup if I needed to justify why we as a security team, and that was one of the first things we did was establish a security team, but why we were making the recommendations we were making for upgrades in the areas we were. It was a great resource for me as an end user. And I'm just like thrilled to get to talk to you about it, especially one of the founding folks around it. So I've mentioned my benefits. Are there any benefits that I missed when I was talking about my experience with PASS?
I think one of the greatest benefits that we brought forth, and you kind of mentioned manufacturers and integrators, when we first started this, one of the things we wanted to do was how could we provide guide rails for the industry to promote security to K through 12, because that was one of the most interesting things that I saw with it was, as you said, with corporate, even in healthcare and other venues, they knew what they needed for security. Schools really didn't. And so a lot of times in the experience that I was seeing is, we want to put cameras in our school. Well, why? Well, because somebody said that was a good idea. We feel that's going to be the best thing. Right. And part of that was there was literally no standard for it. And so I know when we first started, one of the things that we had an IT director that was there that said, I've just been thrust in to say, I'm in charge of security because everything's on the network, is going to be on the network. Right. So what do I do? My background's not security. And that's what I think is the power of the guidelines is we really tried to focus on kind of some things that you said of being able to provide you a checklist, that is easy to understand, not, okay, here's how you do your multi-class threat assessment as a PSP or, as a security professional, but here's how I look at my school and say, here are the things and here are the things that we're doing well, and here's some things that we might be able to work on. And I think that was really the power of the guidelines that we were able to really provide is how do we put that in the language of more of the educator? Because we've literally taken educators and said, you are now security professionals. And oh, by the way, while you're a security professional, let me tell you the way cool product that's out there and why you need it, right, without any framework whatsoever. So that's always been something for me as a mission for PASS is, if nothing more, for school districts to say, this standard's out there. How do you, Mr. Integrator, how do you, Mr. Manufacturer, how do you look at these guidelines and comply with those when you're looking at my school? Because if you, as you've heard, Jill, on a lot of our calls, our mantra over the last year and a half has been, if you've seen one school, you've seen one school. That's right. They're more of each individual community when you walk in there. And so how you approach it has got to be different. And I hope that we've done a good job with the PASS guidelines on the fact that our approach allows you to really tailor fit what you feel your security should be in your district and in your building.
Yeah, thank you, because one of the things that happens to security directors, it happens in other areas as well, but again, a lot of folks in the education have maybe less security experience, even though they step into this role. But there are a lot of approaches made by sales representatives who may or may not also have a high level of security understanding, right? So for me, again, it really helped us kind of formulate what that was and track our progress. So we actually, in my district, I printed off those the guidelines, one set for every school. So we documented by time frame where we were with each level of priority, and that way we could also track our progress over time, which made it a powerful tool, again, to show, number one, there was some thought behind the decisions that were being made, but also the level of progress that we were able to attain. So I understand that there's a new version coming out, version 7 of the PASS guidelines. Can you talk about why the team felt like that was necessary, and what, if you can give us any hints, because I know it's not released yet, what we might be looking forward to on the PASS guidelines when they come out?
Absolutely. So one of the things that we've noticed with schools, as well as just the technology, is just how quickly it advances. And so, we're doing our Rev 7 is going to be sent out this year. And the reason for that is, frankly, because the threats are starting to change. When we started in 2014, one of the things that we wanted to make sure of was this is not just about active shooter.
Yes.
Even though it was right after Columbine, and that's where we saw a lot of the knee-jerk reaction on, we have to put security in schools, we have to do this, we have to do that, but there was no really holistic plan on how to do it. There was no guide on how to do it step by step. And so that was kind of our first foray into it. From there, we started actually adding components to it, because we started recognizing that there are newer technologies, but there are also newer threats and things that we are that the community is being exposed to, that we need to be able to work on. So with Rev 7, some of the bigger things that we looked at was really focused in more on the emergency communication side and how that stuff starts to interface together. We all kind of heard about Alyssa's Law and other laws that have been out there from panic alarm systems. And while a lot of these are well-intentioned, they're not very well written. And so, how does that work when as we said, each school is unique? How do I effectively put in some sort of emergency communication to local law enforcement to let them know what is happening and be able to make that efficient when the building was built in the 1910s, 1920s? It's easy if it's the building that was built in 2024, so those are the type of things that we wanted to look at, was how do we actually bring more of that strategic approach, as well as making sure, will it help be in line with some of the legislation that's there? Some of it is very, very detailed on what you need to do. Some of it, it's kind of the wild, wild west of this, we need to do something. So make sure it does this and make sure it does that. The rest of it is up to you, Mr. Educator. And so we wanted to make sure that as we revise the guidelines, we're doing these things to continue to provide how we continue to secure the buildings and how we look at the new threats in different ways that we can mitigate those threats. So emergency communication is one of the big ones that we worked on. What we also saw from the educators and from our districts is just the overwhelming change in the outlook of security. So there were a lot of things that we did in Rev 7 where, back in Rev 6, we actually looked at how can we take fewer things out of the tier 1. It seemed like we had way too many tier 1 things to check off. And we ended up doing something where we did like a prerequisite. So, because a lot of those things we'd noticed schools are already doing. And so here we are a few years later seeing that, what we considered a tier 1 5 years ago is something that is standard in schools now. And a tier 2 is really standard in schools now. So how are we taking it so that approach continues to progress? And I think you and I have talked about this a little bit too, is, when we went to school, we had books. When my kids went to school, I signed a form saying that if they screwed up the laptop, I had to pay for it. So how we educate our children's change. Well, how we secure the building changes. And so with that approach, we've got to constantly adopt new ways and new practices, and really finding those practices from the K through 12 market, as well as the experts in the security industry.
So it's great to hear that you're focused on communication and emergency communication in particular in version 7, because in every situation that has been a bad situation in a school, communication failures have abounded, right? It has happened in every single situation. So is there any more that you can share with us specifically about emergency communication?
I think the big part on the emergency communication side is making sure that we're looking at a holistic approach and how we're interfacing that with other systems. We really worked hard in those first few revisions of how do we appropriately lock our buildings? How do we appropriately vet schedule visitors? How do we appropriately put video surveillance coverage in that gives us the best benefit for when we're looking at that forensically? And now we're starting to look at how those things are working. So what are we doing on the reaction side? One of the things that I've noticed in just emergency communication and fire safety, which has kind of been my background and the things that I love to do and to research, a lot of what I'm hearing now is not just if they had locked the door, if we had done this. It's more of this communication mechanism broke down. Mm-hmm. This communication needed to be improved. That's a lot of the things that we're starting to see. Mm-hmm. And so we're trying to address that. And with the Internet of Things, that's one of the things that, from a historical aspect, intercoms were required in schools. Mm-hmm. They're not required anymore. So was something that was called UL 1069, mm-hmm. which was a life safety code for communications. Mm-hmm. That no longer applies. And so when we bring these communication technologies that we have now, where everything is IT-based, mm-hmm. there's a lot of value in doing that. But in doing that, a lot of that's been focused on the day-to-day. Mm-hmm. And what we're missing is, how is that working in our emergency situation? Mm-hmm. How are we getting the message out if we have an emergency, weather emergency, and we're trying to get that information out? A lot of times they're saying, hey, it's going to hit people's phones, it's going to do this, it's going to do that. If the building loses power, how are we communicating with those students? If the cell phone tower that's close to the school is one of the things that gets knocked out, how are we now communicating? Mm-hmm. And so those are the type of things that we're seeing, and we're seeing with districts of, we are feeling confident, we are seeing how our buildings and our schools are more protected, and now we need to start focusing on not necessarily the if, but when an emergency happens, because we do have them. Mm-hmm. Just look at the tragedies that we've had just in probably the last 6 months, mm-hmm. across the country. And it has nothing to do with an active shooter.
Right.
We're talking about wildfires, we're talking about floods, we're talking about tornadoes. Yes. And so how are we communicating in those type of aspects? And that's where we're seeing from that communication, that reunification of how are we effectively doing that messaging. And I think that's kind of that next step in how we continue to grow security and continue to keep our kids safe in schools.
Yeah. So it's important in emergency communications and in other communications as well, that the right information gets to the right people at the right time. But additionally, beyond that, does the new version address testing of those systems? Because that's the thing that I kind of saw happening in my district and other districts I was familiar with, was that things were purchased, they were put in place, and just it might as well have been the binder on the shelf, right? Mm-hmm. Covered in dust. No one took it out until they actually had to use it. So they didn't have really the muscle memory to use their emergency communication system, because it was so disparate from the way they communicated all the time. So does the version go into that kind of testing of systems?
Yeah, we always have, actually, from day one, of the importance of testing the systems, at least testing them once a year, that kind of thing. From the emergency communication aspect, as I said, a lot of things that I did was in the fire industry, mm-hmm. and I became a code geek, and actually went back to school to get my degree in fire science, simply because they changed the fire code in 2006 to say that a strobe could be used for something other than fire. First time it had ever happened. And with that, brought in the changes where now schools are required to have an emergency voice communication system in their buildings. And so that, to me, was what dynamically changed how we can do communications and why it's important. And part of that is testing. You know, without having a standard, there's no way for someone to know what are we supposed to do. We didn't have to test intercom. We didn't have to do this. And so just like you said, we usually found out as an integrator that it wasn't working when the first day of school, they said the bell schedules didn't go off in this hallway. So there's something wrong. Well, that's also what we're going to use for a tornado warning. Yeah. So really coming back to the code aspect of the code says we need to fully test these systems once a year. You know, we also look at, you know, we should be testing a emergency communication system daily, whether it's just because it's doing chimes at noon or the fight song in the morning or morning announcements, just making sure that those systems are always up and working. So those are the type of things we try to key in on in Rep 7.
Okay, and I would just, you know, tie into something you said as a school principal, and I was one for 6 years, assistant principal for lots of years before that. When I found out my systems weren't working was the same time that, like, slightly minutes maybe before my integrator might find out that it wasn't. We set off an alarm and people didn't hear it. We made an announcement that was maybe critical for people to have that information, and they didn't hear it. But also there's some day-to-day kind of communications that aren't really well heard. And so I became a fan of a high decibel network speaker that could get to where I needed information to get to and really cut through the noise. I think about gymnasiums, school cafeterias that are full of children, all of them talking at the same time at the top of their lungs. Like, you can't hear yourself think. They never could hear an announcement in those spaces. So we needed a better communication system for the daily, but also for any kind of emergency. So I'm really pleased to hear that that communication is such a focus. Because again, it has been one of the things that's failed in each of those bad situations. And you're right. A tornado that is going to negatively impact a school and harm staff and students is probably going to take out the cell towers that are nearby. If that's our only mechanism, so those redundancies become really important as well. So, you know, we're kind of maybe come full circle with this. Do you have any final thoughts about PASS K12 that you would want to share with people?
I think really the final thoughts is, you know, just having people reach out. So, you know, as you had alluded to, you know, everything that we have on the website is free. You know, as a nonprofit, you know, all the things that our partners and partners like Access, who since day one has just been dedicated to helping us educate the K through 12 industry and be able to just help them with guidelines on how to do it, of just looking at what we have there, because the white papers that we do, the presentations that are done, and frankly, just, you know, emailing with questions that you may have. You know, some of the changes that actually happen in the document or white papers that are written are coming from those districts that say, well, I'm doing this, this, and this. What's the next step? So when we are, you know, kind of looking at what is available there, it's really important just to kind of reach out and use the resources that are there and be able to get involved. You know, one of the things that I've met you because you knew about the PASS guidelines and you came to Access and we got to be able to meet. You said, well, how do I help? And I said, why don't you be on this committee? Why don't you help us with this? You know, because you have a unique experience that's there. You know, another one of the people that we rely a lot on, you know, is this Director of Safety Operations for a school district in the Mid-Atlantic. And when they got hit with a lot of with the storms and everything that happened, literally I got an email from him at like 1 o'clock in the morning saying, I've got 3 schools underwater. I have to bring in mobile classrooms. I have to do this. And so we've worked up this plan, and my team's been doing this and that and this. This might be something that other school districts would like to have. Yes. That's the kind of people that are part of PASS, and they're all volunteers. Yeah. And so that, to me, is what is so amazing, and I'm so grateful for the people that we have. and really just encourage, just go to the passk12.org website and see what's there, because these people are so passionate about trying to get that message out and get that information out and just be willing to help.
Thank you, Scott, for all of your time today and for all your thoughts around PASS. And I would just, again, say what a great resource it is for those districts, as you mentioned, and that, sometimes security directors are sort of on their own out there trying to figure things out, and having a network they can tap into and resources they can get, and again, at no charge. That is just an unusual circumstance in the security world. So thank you again for all of your time and your thoughts today.
Thank you, Jill. Appreciate it.
Yep.